Did you catch what Phil Taylor said? He actually claimed that Luke Littler could eclipse his record of 16 world titles, pointing out that Littler has a full 12-year head start compared to when Taylor won his first. Pretty bold, right? That got everyone talking, and believe it or not, there are folks who agree with Taylor's claim. But then there are those who remember exactly what prime Phil Taylor was like.
But they all count in that outer ring 7-7.
For 3.5 decades, Taylor wasn't just the best, he was the benchmark. He dismantled his opponents. From relentless scoring power to a mental game that broke legends before they even stepped on stage, Taylor set records that still stand untouched. So today, we're taking a deep dive back into the golden years to truly appreciate just how good prime Phil Taylor really was. Ready to take this walk down memory lane? Let's get into it. Phil Taylor wasn't just dominant, he was inevitable. If you played professional darts between the early 90s and the late 2000s and 10s, your fate was sealed before you even stepped on stage. You weren't facing a man, you were facing a machine, programmed to humiliate you leg after leg until you either walked off in stunned silence or clapped politely, pretending this was just another day at the office. It rarely was. Before Taylor, darts was a sport of streaky form and inconsistent champions. After Taylor, it was an execution ground. Some players had great years. Taylor had great decades. 16 world titles, 14 in the PDC, over 200 professional tournament wins. At his best, he made even world-class opponents look like pub players who'd stumbled into a nightmare. And the worst part? They knew it was coming. There was no mystery to Taylor's brilliance. His strategy was terrifyingly simple. Hit a treble 20, then another, then another. Leave yourself on a finish, take it out with mechanical precision, rinse and repeat. His ability to maintain that cycle for years on end is what broke his rivals, because it wasn't just about throwing good darts. It was about knowing deep down that the man across from you didn't miss, that even if you played the best darts of your life, it still might not be enough. Ask anyone who played him in his prime, and they'll tell you the same thing. He had an aura, that invisible force field champions carry where, even before a dart is thrown, the opponent already feels like they're behind. You could see it in the body language, the hesitation before a throw, the quick shake of the head after Taylor opened with 180, the slow dawning realization that this wasn't going to end well. Taylor didn't just set records, he treated them like playthings. Take his performance at the 2010 World Match Play. He averaged 106.31 over an entire match. That number shouldn't even be possible. To put that in perspective, most pros dream of averaging 100. Anything above 105 is world class. Taylor walked in, obliterated Raymond van Barneveld, who averaged 100.11 with one of the most clinical displays of finishing ever seen, and walked out with another trophy for the shelf.
Authority, 64 for Phil Taylor for an 11th World Match Play title at the Seaside. Sid!
Fat 16. Double thereof. Green bit!
Green bit it is! Phil Taylor in a magnificent final!
Take the 2001 World Championship final against John Part. The Canadian played out of his skin, hitting huge scores, taking out massive finishes, and Taylor, he dismantled him 7-0 in the World Final. And then there was the 2013 World Championship final against Michael van Gerwen, the rising superstar of darts. Van Gerwen had just thrown a near-perfect game earlier in the tournament, hitting 17 perfect darts in a row, and was being hyped as the future of the sport. This was supposed to be his moment. Taylor had other plans. He took Van Gerwen apart 7-4, reminding everyone that future great meant nothing when present great was still around.
Double 16 for the match, and it is world title number 16 for Phil Taylor, and it may well be the sweetest of the lot. He has seen off the next great darting superstar, twice coming from 2 sets behind to win and claim the crown for the first time since 2010.
When you talk about Phil Taylor, you're not just talking about a great darts player, you're talking about the darts player, the standard, the reason why every professional today had to raise their game. The man who took darts from smoky pub rooms to packed arenas and £1 million prize pools. And sure, Taylor says Littler might break his record, But some records don't fall easily. Some standards are set so high that even the greatest talents struggle to reach them. Phil Taylor's journey to darts immortality didn't begin in a glamorous arena with roaring crowds and million-pound prize pools. It began in a smoky Stoke-on-Trent pub, with a pint in one hand and a set of battered darts in the other. This wasn't the story of a natural-born prodigy, some wunderkind destined for greatness from childhood. Taylor was a working-class guy, holding down jobs in a ceramics factory, throwing darts for fun. If you told him then that he'd become the most dominant player in the history of the sport, he'd probably have laughed and asked if you were buying the next round. But then came Eric Bristow. A 5-time world champion and one of the sport's biggest personalities, Bristow wasn't just a legend, he was a kingmaker. He could spot talent, and when he saw Taylor, he saw potential. Not a fully formed champion, but someone who could be molded into one. Bristow didn't just mentor him, he funded him, giving him £10,000 to kickstart his career. In return, Taylor promised to pay it back once he started winning, a simple deal. Except Bristow underestimated just how quickly that investment would pay off.
We'll see how much I'm wasting my money in the end, and he played well in the end, and well, the rest of it is history, isn't it?
Is he the best player you've ever seen?
Consistent-wise, you can't argue with him. No. I mean, I always say, if you're looking at people, you've got to look, you know, what I always say, what have they won? You know, you look at Phil's resume, I mean, it's ridiculous. 13 times world champion, all these other tournaments, 5, 8 times.
It's incredible.
Brilliant averages, so many 9-dart 501s on TV. I mean, the man speaks for himself.
Yeah.
You know?
Taylor didn't just improve under Bristow's guidance, he became terrifyingly efficient. The raw skill was refined into something lethal, and in 1990, the pupil destroyed the master. The BDO World Championship final saw Taylor step up against Bristow himself, the man who made him, the man who believed in him, and Taylor showed his gratitude by wiping the floor with him 6-1. It wasn't even close. The darts world had been put on notice. That win was the start of something bigger. Because Taylor wasn't content with winning once, he wanted to dominate, and he wouldn't just change his own legacy, he would change the sport itself. Just 2 years after his first world title, darts split in half. The top players, frustrated with how the BDO was running things, broke away to form the PDC. This wasn't just a business move, it was a revolution. Taylor, along with 15 other players, took a risk, betting that this new organization would be the future of the sport. At the time, it was a gamble. In hindsight, it was the moment that secured Taylor's place as the undisputed king of darts. The PDC became Taylor's playground. As the organization grew, so did his legend. The wins started piling up, the records began falling. Opponents weren't just losing to Taylor, they were being destroyed. And while other players had great seasons, great runs, great moments, Taylor was building an empire. By the mid-90s, it wasn't a question of whether he would win, it was a question of how badly he'd beat you. And soon, that empire would turn into an unstoppable dynasty. Phil erased the concept of competition. He wasn't part of an era, he was the era. It wasn't just that Taylor won, it was how he won. Most players would have been satisfied with a tight victory, a dramatic last-leg decider, maybe even a scrappy comeback. Not Taylor. He preferred ritual sacrifices. That was the Taylor effect. He forced players into desperation mode before they even realized it. You'd see it happen in real time. The quick glance at the scoreboard confirming what they already knew. Taylor was ahead, and he wasn't slowing down. Take the 2002 World Championship final against Peter Manley. Manley was a great player, confident, brash, never one to back down. But against Taylor, he became a spectator in his own final. Taylor managed another world final whitewash, 7-0. A match that should have been the biggest test of his career. Instead, it was a televised execution. By the end, Manley wasn't even mad. He just looked relieved it was over. Other legends had rivalries. Taylor had victims. John Part, Dennis Priestley, Peter Manley, Raymond van Barneveld, all great players in their own right, all left in Taylor's wake. And when a new wave of talent emerged, led by the likes of Adrian Lewis, Gary Anderson, and Michael van Gerwen, Taylor didn't fade. He adapted, reinvented himself, kept winning. Even as younger, faster, more explosive players arrived, Taylor remained a constant. He was the final boss, the immovable object, the last man standing when the dust settled. His presence on the Oki was so intimidating that players would celebrate just getting close to beating him. That was the level of dominance we're talking about. But of course, no reign lasts forever. And while Taylor was still racking up wins, something was beginning to shift. The new generation wasn't just challenging him, they were starting to win. The cracks in the empire were forming, and for the first time in 2 decades, the future of darts belonged to someone else. all great empires eventually fall. Even the most dominant figures in sports history reach a point where challengers no longer look at them with fear, but with opportunity. The whisper started around the early 2010s, not loud, not urgent, just murmurs in the background. Younger players were hitting higher averages. The gaps in Taylor's dominance, once microscopic, were now visible if you look closely enough. The rest of the field wasn't just playing to make up the numbers anymore. They wanted to beat him, and worse, they believed they could. Then came Michael van Gerwen, not just a young talent, a phenomenon, the first player since Taylor himself who seemed genetically engineered to play perfect darts. He wasn't intimidated, he wasn't in awe, and he sure as hell wasn't there to just make up the numbers. By 2014, the shift was undeniable. Van Gerwen had taken Taylor's crown, becoming the new world number one. This wasn't just another great player on a hot streak. This was a changing of the guard, and yet Taylor wasn't ready to step aside. His decline wasn't some dramatic freefall, it was a slow, stubborn resistance. He still won titles, still made deep runs, still turned up at the biggest events like the seasoned gunslinger refusing to be run out of town. But the dominance, the fear factor, that was gone. By 2018, the end was official. Taylor's last dance at the PDC World Championship was fittingly grand. One final run to the final, one last reminder of who he was, what he built. But the fairy tale ending wasn't in the script. Instead, it was Rob Cross, a complete unknown at the start of the year, who delivered the knockout punch, a player who had never even competed at the World Championship before. The symbolism was too obvious to ignore. The next generation had fully arrived. Taylor walked away after that match. No dramatic speeches, no tearful farewell, just a quiet exit from the stage he had once ruled with an iron fist. And yet, his presence still looms over the sport. Every dart player today, whether they admit it or not, plays in his shadow. Because here's the thing about legacies, they don't fade just because someone else steps up. And when you win 16 world titles, break every meaningful record in the book, and redefine what greatness looks like, you don't just disappear. So yes, Taylor believes Luke Littler could surpass his record, but belief is one thing, reality is another. Because if history has taught us anything, it's that some records are only broken when the sport itself changes forever. The recently turned adult has time on his side, talent beyond his years, and a fearlessness that few players have ever shown. But time and talent aren't enough. Because Taylor didn't just set records, he built an empire. And to break his record, someone wouldn't just have to be great, they'd have to be Taylor level inevitable. They'd have to crush generations of players the way he did, and that's the part people forget. So what do you think? Will Taylor's record stand forever, or are we witnessing the rise of someone who can actually surpass the power? Let us know in the comments. And if you want to see what happens when a darts empire doesn't last, when mismanagement and bad decisions send a legendary organization into the abyss, check out our deep dive into the failure of the BDO.